Good day. We are Group 3 and we're going to discuss about Chapter 3, 4, and 5. Next slide. I am Miranda Miles Michaela and I'm with Bugagon Kirk, Levantino Ivan, Manalo Syra Ivy, and Maranan Mary Angelica. Next slide. So, first we're gonna discuss about Chapter 3, Research Methodology, Measures of Central Tendency. Next slide. So, when I say statistics, it is a numerical index describing a characteristics of a sample. So, statistics defined as numerical data and is a branch of mathematics concerned with the collection, tabulation, and interpretation of numerical data, while statistical treatment is a mathematical treatment used for summarizing or analyzing numerical data or information. So, the term statistical treatment refers to the application of any statistical method to your data. To get the statistical treatment, you can use measure of central tendency, standard deviation, F-test and T-test, analysis of variance or ANOVA, and chi-square. Next slide. So first we have measure of central tendency. So measure of central tendency has mean, median, and mode. So the mean is the most common measure of central tendency. It is the sum of the numbers divided by the numbers of numbers. So it simply means it is an average after adding all the numbers in the dataset and dividing by the number of values in the dataset. So the formula in getting the mean is equal to sum of all data values divided by number of data items. Next slide. So we have a data set of scores here. So to get the mean, first get the sum of all data values. And to get that, you will add all the numbers in the data set, which are 13 plus 13 plus 13 plus 13 plus 14 plus 14 plus 16 plus 18 and plus 21. That is equal to 135. And next, to get the number of data items is to count the data items in the data set, which is 9. So mean is equal to 135 divided by 9 is equal to 15. So 15 is the mean in the given set of scores. Next slide. So median. Median is the middle value in the list of numbers. To find the median, your numbers have to be listed in numerical order from smallest to largest. So in short, it refers to the middle value when it is in ascending order. Example, it is the same example dataset in the mina, yung kanina. So, it contains data items. So, the fifth of which is the middle one. As a result, the fifth one is 14, which serves as the median. Next slide. So, mode. Mode refers to the value that occurs most often. If no number in the list is repeated, then there is no mode for the list. So, it is the same example dataset in the mean and median. So, as we can see in the dataset, 13 is the most frequently occurring number, so it serves as the mode. Next slide and next reporter.
Standard deviation. The standard deviation is a statistic that measures the dispersion of a dataset relative to its mean, and it's calculated as the square root of the variance. Formula for standard deviation. Population standard deviation is equal to the square root of the sum of each value from the population minus the population mean squared all over the size of the population. F-test and T-test, p-value, is the probability of getting results as extreme as observed values under null hypothesis. For practical purposes, reject a null hypothesis if the negative value is less than alpha. T-test. A t-test is a statistical test that is used to compare the means of two groups. It is often used in hypothesis testing to determine whether a process or treatment actually has an effect of the population of interest or whether two groups are different from one another. Characteristics of the test are the following. Number 1. The test statistic follows a t-distribution under null hypothesis. Number 2. The test can be used to find if the mean of a population is different from a known mean. Number 3. The test can be used to find out if the means of two samples are significantly different. Note that the two populations need to follow the normal distribution. Also, the variances of the two populations need to be equal if sample size is less than 30. Number 4. The test can be used to find out if the difference between values of a single variable measured at different times is zero. Number 5. The test can be used to find out if the regression line has a slope different from zero. Number 6. Paired versus unpaired. A test of type 3 is a paired test. The samples are independent. A test of type 4 is an unpaired test in many cases of unpaired data. It is the same variable undergoing repeated observations, for example, measurements taken before and after an experiment. Lastly, number 7. The questions that need to be answered before using the t-test are: is it a single population or multiple populations? Are the sample sizes equal? Are the variances equal? And is it a paired or unpaired test?
F-test is used to find out if the variances between the populations are significantly different. When we say F-test, it is most often used when comparing statistical models that have been fitted to a dataset. F means variation between sample means. F means variation between sample means or variation within the samples. Plus, researchers drawn out an inference about the data that is drawn from a particular population. Next slide, please. Characteristic of an F test are the following. The test statistic has an F distribution under null hypothesis. The ratio of variances follows an F distribution. So why does the test statistic has an F distribution under null hypothesis? Because the sums of squares should be statistically independent, and each should follow a scaled chi-square. The condition is guaranteed if the data values are independent and normally distributed with a common variance. Number 2, F test can be used to find out if the data fits into a regression. When we say F-test, it is most often used when comparing statistical models that have been fitted to a dataset. While when we say ANOVA, ito yung naghihiwalay sa pagkakaiba-iba sa loob ng group. Also, an analysis tools is used in statistics that split and observe, aggregate variability found inside the dataset into two parts, which is systematic factors and random factors. Next slide, please. F-test can be used to find out if the data fits into regression. Models obtained using least square analysis. Here we compare if the mean square due to error is significantly different from the mean square due to regression. The mean squared error measures how close a regression line is to a set of data points. Mean square error is calculated by taking the average, specifically the mean of errors squared from data as it relates to a function. Number 4. The test can be a two-tailed or a tailed test. In this part, two-tailed test means a method in which the critical area of a distribution is two-sided and tests whether a sample is greater than or less than a certain range of values. Karaniwang ginagamit to sa null hypothesis testing and testing for statistical significance. Number 5. F-test for ANOVA for two variables is equivalent to performing the t-test. Also, the relation is given by F is equal to t squared. ANOVA uses the F-test to determine whether the variability between group means is larger than the variability of the observation within the groups. If the ratio is if the ratio is sufficiently large, you can conclude that not all the means are equal. And lesson number 6, for ANOVA, the F-test is the measure of ratio of variance between groups and variance within the sample groups. Analysis of variance uses F-tests to statistically assess the, the equality of means when you have three or more groups. When we say ANOVA, it uses F-tests to statistically test the equality of means. Next reporter, please.
Analysis of variance. ANOVA. Analysis of variance is a statistical technique that is used to check if the means of the two or more groups are significantly different. ANOVA checks the impact of one or more factors by comparing the means of different samples. The ANOVA is made by Ronald Fisher in 1918, and they extend the z-test, which have the problem of only allowing the nominal level variable to have just two categories. This test is also called the Fisher analysis of variance. Next slide, please. General purpose of ANOVA. ANOVA is commonly used by a researcher and students in many ways depending on the research design, and there is three ways to use it. Number one is one-way ANOVA, two is two-way ANOVA, and lastly, n-way multivariate ANOVA. Next slide, please. One-way ANOVA. One-way ANOVA refers to the number of independent variables, not the number of categories in each variable. A one-way ANOVA is just one independent variable. For example, differences in IQ can be assessed by country, and country can have 2 or 20 or more different countries in that variable. Next reporter, please.
Two-way ANOVA. A two-way ANOVA refers to an ANOVA using two independent variables. So unlike one-way ANOVA, two-way ANOVA uses two independent variables. It examines the impact and the effect of two independent variables in dependent variable. For example, examine the difference in IQ score by country and by gender. So, gender and country is our independent variable and IQ score is our dependent variable. Next slide. Two-way ANOVA, it can be used to examine the interaction between two independent variables. So, yung interaction na tinatawag natin, ito yung pag-combine ng effect or impact ng two independent variables natin. For example, female may have higher IQ score overall compared to male and are much greater in European countries compared to North America countries. Two-way ANOVA are also called factorial ANOVA. Factorial ANOVA can be balanced, have the same number of participants. For example, the males have 10 participants and the female have also 10 participants. Unbalanced, example of that is the female have 10 participants and the male have only 5 participants. Not having equal size group can make it appear that there's an effect when this may not be in the case. Next slide. Chi-square. So, chi-square is the non-parametric test of statistical significance that is used when research data are in form of frequency counts for two more categories or more categories. So, chi-square, ginagamit siya to determine the relationship between the two categories. It also, chi-square also checks kung meron bang differ significance between the observed frequency or expected frequency. So for example, merong sinabi sa'yo ng kaibigan mo na yung population ng school nyo is composed of 50% female and 50% male. So, by proving that point, gagawa ka ng experiment wherein kukuha ka ng 10 participant galing sa population ng school nyo to compare kung meron bang difference, kung totoo bang 50-50% yung composed population ng school nyo. So, formula of chi-square is chi-square equal to chi-square is equal to summation of O minus E squared over E. Next slide. Now, we will proceed to the presentation, analysis, and interpretation of data, Chapter 4. Next slide. According to Marshall and Rossman, data analysis is the process of bringing order, structure, and meaning to the mass of collected data. It is messy, ambiguous, time-consuming, creative, and fascinating process. It does not proceed in linear fashion. It is not neat. Data analysis is the search for answer about relationship among categories of data. So, data analysis and interpretation are considered to be one of the important steps in research paper. So, considered siya as one of the important step dahil in data analysis, dito natin sinasala and kinakategorize yung mga collected data natin. And sa interpretation naman, dito natin binibigyan ng meaning yung data na nakuha natin based on our observation. Next slide. The most critical and essential supporting pillars of the research are the analysis and interpretation of data. With the help of interpretation, step 1 was able to achieve a conclusion from the set of gathered data. Interpretation has two major aspects, namely establishing continuity in the research through linking the results of given study with those of another and the statement of some relationship with the collected data. Interpretation can be defined as the device through which the factors, which seems to explain what has been observed by the researcher in the course of study. Next slide.
Presentation. Presentation is the process of organizing data into logical, sequential, and meaningful categories and classifications to make them amenable to study and interpretation. Analysis. Analysis means ordering, manipulating, and summarizing of data to obtain answers to research questions. Its purpose is to reduce data to intelligible and interpretable form so that the relations of research problems can be studied and tested. Interpretation. Interpretation demands fair and careful judgments. Often the same data can be interpreted in different ways, so it is helpful to involve others or take time to hear how different people interpret the same information.
So we have three ways to present data: textual, tabular, and graphical. So textual presentation of data means presenting data in forms of words and sentences and paragraph. While tabular, the data is arranged in rows and columns. It is a table that helps to represent even a large amount of data in an engaging, easy to read, and coordinated manner. And graphical, or while graphical, is a form of visually displaying the data through various methods like graphs, diagrams, and charts. It helps in visualizing and presenting data in a clear manner through different types of graphs. Next slide. So, types of graphs and charts. So, we have bar graph, linear graph, pie graph. Next slide. Pictograms, statistical maps, and ratio charts. Next slide and next reporter.
General guidelines in reporting and writing analysis and interpretation. 1. An introductory paragraph is provided at the start of chapter. Number 2. Subtitle subsections are based on the question in the statement of the problem, stated in the declarative form or single-space mode. 3. Table and figure numbers and titles are written in capital lowercase at the center, single space. Title should come after the number, arranged in inverted pyramid. Next slide, please. Number 4. Tables and figures. Figures should be in continuous numbering. It should be presented first before discussion. Enclosed tables with double lines on top should be used. Graph should be colored. Number 5. Discussion should follow the format, presentation of the table itself, analysis and interpretation, the implication, related literature, and studies may be used to support the findings. Next reporter, please.
Think under the data tables. Number 1, table to the as in there was the years will at can state it found to be determinant of next slide please. Next slide po. A factor of number 11 in relation with the result of blank, it may be constructed that number 12, and in viewing in this sense, it can be stated that number 13, the result establishes that fact. Number 14, the findings suggest that. Number 15, with this result, the researcher developed an impression that. Next slide and next reporter, please.
In Chapter 5, we will tackle about summary, recommendation, and conclusion. This is the last chapter of the thesis and the most important part because this is where the findings and the whole thesis for that matter are summarized. Generalizations in the form of conclusions are made and the recommendations for the solution of problems discovered in the study are addressed to those concerned. The conclusion should clarify concepts defined within the scope of the study. Moreover, it should explain the relationship of the variables under study. Most importantly, it should answer all questions raised by the researchers. Ethically, the researchers should give the true findings of study. The researchers are not supported to fabricate results to achieve the desired conclusions. Instead, the researchers should prove or disprove the relationship of the variables based on the findings of the study. General guidelines in writing the summary of findings. Number 1. Subtitles of the summary of findings should follow the statement of the problem. Only averages or means and final values should be mentioned. Number 2. There should be a brief statement about the main purpose of the study, the population or respondents, the period of the study, method of research use, the research instrument, and the sampling design. Number 3. The findings may be lumped up all together, but clarity demands that each specific questions under the statement of the problem must be written first to be followed by the findings that would answer it. The specific questions should follow the order they are given under the statement of the problem. Lastly, number 4, the findings should be textual generalizations, that is, a summary of the important data consisting of text and numbers. Every statement of fact should consist of words, numbers, or statistical measures woven into a meaningful statement. No deductions, nor inference, nor interpretation should be made, otherwise it will only be duplicated in the conclusion. Next reporter po.
Guidelines in writing the conclusion. Number one is conclusion should be logically written, representing the valid outgrowths uh, of the findings. Conclusion should have inferences, deductions, abstraction, implication, interpretation, general statements, and or generalization based on findings. Next is conclusion should appropriately answer the specific question raised at the beginning of the investigation in the order they are given under the statement of the problem. Next slide, please. Number three, conclusion should point out what were factually learned from the inquiry. However, no conclusion should be drawn from the implied or indirect effects of the findings. Number four, conclusion should be formulated concisely, that is brief and short, yet the study as required by by the specific questions. Without any strong evidence to the contrary, conclusion should be stated categorically. They should be worded as if they are 100% true and correct. They should not give any hint that the researcher has some doubts about their validity and reliability. The use of quantifiers such as probably, perhaps, maybe, and the like should be avoided. Next slide, please. Number six, conclusion should be referred only to the population, area, or subject of the study. And lastly, conclusion should not be repetitions of any statement anywhere in the research paper. They may be recapitulations if necessary, but they should be worded differently and they should convey the same information as the statements recapitulated. Next reporter, please.
Guidelines in writing the recommendations. Calderon and Gonzalez in year 2008. Number 1. No recommendation should be made for a problem or anything for them that matter that has not been discovered or discussed in the study. Recommendation for things not discussed in the study are irrelevant. Our recommendation should be valid. Hindi rin dapat tayo nagbibigay ng recommendation na mali. Recommendation na nagbibigay ng cause of the problem. Dapat nakapaloob din sa topic or study yung recommendation natin. Number 2. There may also be recommendations for the continuance of a good practice or system, or even recommendations for its improvement. This is to ensure continuous benefits being accorded to the universe involved. In this recommendation, much better na we gave a good practice for improvement, a specific actions to be taken with regard to policy, practice, or theory. Specific suggestions that you make is regarded to further research on the topic. Next slide, please. Number 3. Recommendations should aim for the ideals, but they must be feasible, practical, and attainable. It is useless to recommend the impossible. Recommendation should be logical and valid. When we recommend, we gave ideas. Hindi lang basta idea, dapat more on practices and yung makatotohanan. Dapat feasible, yung capable of doing that and possible to do easily or conveniently. Number 4, recommendation should be logical and valid. When we recommend, it is needed to be logical and valid. The goal of the report is to compare options, recommend option, and to support that recommendation propose or recommend the valid available to solve a problem or fill a need. Recommendation should provide evidence para mas kapani-paniwala at katanggap-tanggap yung nire-recommend natin. Next slide, please. Number 5, recommendation should be addressed to the person, entities, agencies, or offices who or which are in position to implement them. Professional recommendations are used by applicants who have previous experience in a field related to the opportunity they are applying to. Professional recommendations provide evidence to hiring managers regarding an applicant's knowledge, work ethic, and performance in a previous experience. And lastly, number 6, there should be a recommendation for further research on the same topic in other places to verify, amplify, or negate the findings of the study. This is necessary so that if the findings are the same, generalizations of wider application can be formulated. Present your conclusion in clear, simple language. Indicate opportunities for future research if you haven't already done in the discussion section of your paper. You can usually do this in one paragraph with 3 main key points and one strong take-home message. You should not present any arguments in your conclusion. The research, which shall be carried out and conducted by researchers pursuant to the further research program hereunder. It may require further research to define and quantity attributes. Also needs to be considered historic and structure. Next reporter, please.
So, listing references. So, listing references happens at the end of any research work. It is a pages that contains a list of the references used during the research writing. So, to avoid plagiarism, researchers need to acknowledge all the sources with their complete, correct information and formal, and are usually organized alphabetically. Next slide. So, references include a complete list of all coded and paraphrased works that the researcher actually used in completing the study, while bibliography includes a complete list of all works related to the study but are not directly contained in the report. So, references include sources that have directly cited in your paper. Bibliographies, on the other hand, contains all the sources that you have used to generate ideas for your paper, whether they are directly cited or not. So, reference list allows readers to locate and use the sources you have cited. Reference information must be complete and accurate by including the following information in the reference entry, like author's name, year publication, title of the work, and the publication information, according to Liddy and Ormrod in Casella and Cuevas 2010. Next slide and next reporter.
Presenting the written research report. The final report is the document that ultimately represents the research. The report is the record of the research content, process, and analysis as reported by the researcher. It also serves as the scientific contribution a researcher make about what is known about the social world. It can also act as a catalyst for further research, according to Kirby et al. 2006. Next slide. Here are the following considerations that are important in presenting the written research report according to Kirby et al. 2006. First, while the content will always be essentially the same for each audience, The emphasis on specific point and the way in which they are expressed will be different depending on the target audience. So, kapag nagre-report ka ng research report mo, it should always be depend on the target audience. So, kunyari, ang target audience mo is businessman. So, yung way mo ng pagre-report dapat in a way na makaka-relate and maiintindihan nila. Second, the report need not be substantially different from drafts, except where participants have indicate the change is necessary. Third, it should begin with the restatement of the beginnings of the research project and end with a summary. So since nakabuo na tayo ng conclusion, yung beginnings of research project natin dapat nabago na natin based on the conclusion that we form. Next. Fourth, the summary section provides a description and explanation of new knowledge discovered, or the unique contribution that is research make. Not too much detail is needed here. Simple answer the research question and draw the conclusion. Fifth, final report can suggest some potential direction for further research and possibly what kind of policy or individual or group action might be recommended. Lastly, the reader must be informed why this research count and why it is important. So, importante na yung readers mo is informed kung ano yung mga significance and benefits na makukuha nila sa research na kinokonduct mo. And that is all for our report. Thank you for listening.